Hi, Allison Zmuda, and I am thrilled to have Mike join us for part 4 of our conversation. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Allison.
And we are doing the final conversation around Mike's 9th book, Tackling the Motivation Crisis. And the 4th part of the story is really stepping back and thinking about what are the kinds of coaching practices, strategies, approaches that any teacher can do to continue to be on this path of growing students' intrinsic motivation, as well as start to see how that actually impacts you, your colleagues, and potentially, especially in my case, your family life. So thanks so much, Mike, for joining us.
Absolutely.
So there were a couple of ideas that really captured my attention in the structure on the role of the teacher. So as we started talking about in part 1, we're moving away from teacher as manager to teacher as modeler in terms of thinking about how to actually showcase and model that level of motivation and self-management. So let's start with the idea of effective modeling. Can you break that practice down for us?
Sure. So the practice of effective modeling is something that I often work with teachers on. It's a way that we can be really clear and specific when we want to teach kids a certain strategy, or we want all kids to see and try one particular strategy. So there are 4 key components to that. We give a really crisp goal statement. I'm going to show you what it looks like to disagree with somebody respectfully. Watch me and see what you notice. Then they need to see a really positive demonstration. We need to show them what to do, not what not to do, which can often elicit a laugh, but gets really confusing for kids. So let's show them what we want them to do. They need an opportunity to reflect on what they saw, and then they need a chance to practice. And it's those 4 components that we kind of mix and match depending on the age of the kids and the complexity of the task that we're modeling that allows modeling to really work in order for kids to see what to do, have a chance to practice it, get a little bit of feedback, do some reflecting. It's a really simple and powerful practice, one we can use pre-K through 12 plus.
Yeah, and so that's something that we're describing now as what the teacher can do in front of the classroom, for example. So you could do that with a whole class, you could do that with a small group or what have you.
Even
but that's
with just one student.
That's right. So
Yeah.
that's one approach or one strategy. Let's talk about something different where the teacher isn't the lead learner or the one that's in front of the room. Let's talk about the idea of the fishbowl, because I thought as you described it, while I am very familiar with what the fishbowl approach is, the way you described it, I thought was quite compelling.
Yeah, so the way that that I've seen fishbowl used well, and the way I've used it with my own students, is that you get a small group of students who are all going to try something out together, and the rest of the students are going to stand around them. That's where the fishbowl comes from. It's like they're looking in at the students in the middle in the fishbowl, and they are going to do some active observation. So they're going to watch the students trying out a strategy or watch the students engaging in some work in order to reflect and think about what the students are doing well. And then the whole class is going to come together and have a discussion around what some of the observers saw and noticed. So it can be a really powerful strategy for helping kids think about certain self-management strategies or work organization skills or collaborative group dynamic skills that that enable all kids to be active, but not necessarily all trying it out right at the same time. You might have some kids who are sort of ready to try it out, and others still need a participatory role, and they get to observe and participate through observation. So it can be a really cool strategy.
No, and that actually leads to 2 more sort of related strategies: slow down and let students observe, and slow down and have students ask questions. So this really actually, to me, as I was reading this, it actually gets kids not only just immersed in the dynamics of interpersonal skill development and also recognizing the self-management behaviors. In these 2 cases, you can also start seeing how it impacts their processing of content information, their ability to start to identify generalizations and patterns, whether it was something that is coming up in my own mind as I'm reading or viewing, but I also can see what is emanating from other groups' participation and contributions.
It's so important for us to slow things down every now and then. We can get so caught up in this crush to cover content and to make sure kids are being productive and doing a lot. But in the end, are we trying to develop people who are learned or who are really highly skilled learners? And I am willing to sacrifice a little bit of the learnedness, if that's a word, to help kids become more skillful learners. So there was a quote that hung at the entrance of the elementary school where I first started teaching in Connecticut. It was a quote by Eric Hoffer, and it has stuck with me for years, decades. The quote is, "In times of change, learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will be beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists."
Yeah.
And so, so as we are facilitating learning with our students, and I like to think of great teachers as great learning facilitators. That's what we do, is we enable great learning to happen. So as we think about helping our kids be more skilled learners, a lot of the times it means we need to slow down a little bit and help kids understand the learning process, be more thoughtful and reflective and metacognitive about the work they're doing and the learning they're engaged in. It's that slowing down of the pace that allows kids to really develop the skills they need to be really, really good learners in the long run.
So that leads me into the final one that I'd love for you to talk about is feedback that supports competence, because it's very much a bridge to the conversation that we just had, and how we are continuing to think about what students can continue to not only become learned, and learned isn't a bad thing, but the notion is if they actually see that in relation to performance on for a mark or a score, as opposed to seeing the value, the purpose, the direction that it can take long after the assignment or test is over. So can you talk a little bit about one or two strategies under the header of feedback that supports competence?
Yeah, sure. So I think the feedback we give and the way in which we give feedback is so critical. It's that sort of back end of the learning loop that we want to make sure we do really well. And I think too often in schools, we frame feedback in one of a couple of ways. We either give very generic feedback that's not specific, great essay, or
Well done.
well done, awesome, excellent, exclamation point.
Or my favorite, a line and then a check.
Right. So there's no real identification there of what kids have done well. They might have that brief glow for a moment. Oh, good, the teacher thinks I'm excellent. But what did I do that was so good? How am I going to replicate it if I don't even know what it was? So that's one thing we can do with feedback, is be more specific and more concrete. And I remember working with a teacher in a school once. He was a 5th grade teacher. And we were talking about why we should move away from just framing feedback in terms of like, great job. And he totally said this with a twinkle in his eye. So he got that what he was saying was ridiculous. He said, yeah, but it's so much easier to say great job because you don't have to pay attention to what kids are doing. and everybody in the room was kind of like, but it totally spoke to this truth, which is it's easy for us to be cheerleaders when giving feedback. Awesome job, great job, but without actually looking and seeing what they did. So that's one thing that we need to shift, is focus more of our feedback on the specific attributes of kids' work that they did well. I think another thing we can do with our feedback, another shift we can make, is to not rely on summative feedback quite so much, but instead give more formative feedback along the way. If a kid has worked on a piece of writing for a month and they don't get any feedback on that writing until they've got a grade attached to it and they're getting comments about how they did.
Right.
I heard somebody once call that it's like a post-mortem. The piece is dead. They're not working on it anymore. And now they're getting feedback. I think so. Instead, we might give more and more feedback about process and more feedback along the way to help drive kids' revisions and ongoing thinking, and not give quite so much of the feedback at the end of the whole process.
Yeah, and that reminds me of working with a high school English teacher, also in Connecticut, where she actually had students study their own writing artifacts and then make an exhibition to her to talk about their own strengths and areas of growth and ways they made improvement. So the mark actually arrived toward the end of the quarter, and they're actually activating and being asked their position, their opinion, but it's grounded in evidence of their own work, as opposed to I worked hard or I did the best that I could. So the interesting dynamic of continuing to not only grow feedback that supports competence from a teacher side, and you do such a brilliant job of, instead of saying this, you might want to say that. But the other part, as you talked in this final chapter or two, it's really starting to grow the students' capacity to have a seat at not only the design table for co-creation, but at the evaluation table, so that they are fundamentally sort of in partnership in the scoring and evaluation of work. So
Absolutely.
ultimately, it's just a quality standard or expectation that you're arriving at together.
And it can be so powerful when kids have the opportunity to take a more active role in assessing and evaluating the work that they're doing. It's not just about meeting their needs for competence, that's important, but it's also about giving them more autonomy, increasing their sense of purpose. There are multiple intrinsic motivators that can be activated through helping kids become more reflective and more a part of the process when it comes to, determining how good is the work and how do we know? That's so powerful.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for spending some time with me. And again, if you haven't read the book, Tackling the Motivation Crisis, definitely go ahead and purchase it. We'll give a sneak peek of an example or two in this interview session. But again, it's just such a joy spending time with you.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much, Allison.
Take care.
Bye.